If I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm doing everything within my power to try to improve this offense over the last 7 games. And if that means calling Ken Dorsey, then so be it. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. A big shout out to all the everydayers out there. Don't forget, you can always subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to keep the conversation going, take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, and much more, you can become a Locked On Saints insider by simply texting Who Dat to 504-285-7473 to join a community I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nolda on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, Saints News Network, Tuesdays on the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at just why the New Orleans Saints offense has struggled as mightily as it has through the first 10 games. And if the Saints want to do something about that, why they haven't made the moves that the Las Vegas Raiders and the Buffalo Bills have. And to kick everything off in terms of that conversation, let's take a look at the move that the Buffalo Bills did make, because they moved on from their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey. And if I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm doing everything that I can to try to improve this team's offense in the last 7 games, including calling Ken Dorsey. Now listen, Ken Dorsey might not want another job right now. He might be like, you know what? I'm all good, because he just got scapegoated in Buffalo. But there are valid questions and valid concerns around Ken Dorsey and the performance of the Buffalo Bills offense. If you look at the metrics and the numbers, there's lots of good things to say about the Buffalo Bills. However, one big criticism probably sounds very familiar to you. Here's Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, and one of the big things that he highlighted that led to Ken Dorsey's firing, and why, if you're looking at the New Orleans Saints, you might go, well, I don't really know about that one.
As you watch this, and even in this Denver game that just happened, it's execution error after execution error, mistake after mistake. And while you can point at players for sure for not executing, not catching a pass, not making the right decision, fumbling, missing a block, when there's this much in terms of execution errors, you got to point it right back to the guy coordinating the whole thing and say, why do your players consistently not execute the way that they need to win football games, right? So you can be disappointed in some of the players and some of the miscues there, but the frequency of the execution issues started to really put my eyes right back on Ken Dorsey.
Astute observation there from Joe. If there is an issue, consistently an issue with execution, you stop looking at the players eventually and you start looking at the coaching. You start looking at who's coordinating the offense, as Joe said. In the postcast in the loss against the Minnesota Vikings, I said that the New Orleans Saints have what they need to be a much better team than they have proven to be thus far, and that they have the weapons on offense, but have not yet found the system that would be able, or created a system that would be able to maximize what they have. This is something else that Joe said immediately after that clip that I just mentioned in talking about Ken Dorsey and the Buffalo Bills. He said, not coordinating an offense that has the ingredients necessary to maximize their talent was a big issue for Buffalo. So those two things should sound familiar, but here's what I'm going to say. Those are similar issues, Buffalo and New Orleans. But let's look at the production difference, because it's one thing to have the execution issues. It's another thing to have the execution issues and lack the production. And Buffalo is not lacking in both of those areas. It was lacking in execution, certainly not in the production. If you look at Mina Kimes put out a tweet that kind of highlighted where Buffalo was in a lot of different metrics, advanced metrics like DVOA, success rate, and EPA per play, which we don't have to get into, but just know that it's basically a per play measure of efficiency. Is the offense efficient? Is it not efficient? There you go. That's what you need to know about those. As well as more standard things, yards per play, red zone conversion, third down conversion, and then QBR, measuring the quarterback. In every single one of those metrics, the Buffalo Bills were top 3. 1, 2, 3. You know those trends. Top 3, except for one of those metrics, QBR, in which they were 4th. So they were still top 5. The New Orleans Saints, on the other hand, in the 20s in every single one of those metrics, with the exception of one. One saving grace outside of the 20s EPA per play on offense, in which the New Orleans Saints were 19th. Power to you. It's one thing to lack the execution or to have challenges with execution. It's a whole other ballgame to lack execution and production. The New Orleans Saints are on the wrong side of that conversation. They lack the production and they lack the execution. So even if they don't go after Ken Dorsey, because Dennis Allen did say at one point earlier on in the season that there are not people outside the organization that they feel can come in and improve where they are right now. And that's usually the case. Does that change now that Ken Dorsey's available? Does Ken Dorsey even want another job right now? Like I said earlier, he might be like, nah, I'm all good. Like I'm taking a little break from the NFL. I'll see y'all in the offseason. Wouldn't blame him. But can you bring him in as a consultant? Can you bring him in to come in and give you a fresh level of ideas? You brought John Gruden in to consult. You brought John Gruden in to visit and all those other things. Can you do the same thing with a guy like Ken Dorsey, who's at least getting production out of his offense, right? Who's getting even players that are dealing with execution concerns. There's still a top 5 offense in the most important metrics in offensive football, right? In terms of measuring offensive football. The Saints are having execution concerns and are not even holding a candle to that conversation. So can there be something like that? The other thing would be, Dennis Allen said and told us on Monday that they have no expectations of making any staff changes or changing around staff responsibilities over the course of the bye week. This is a very, very loyal organization, the New Orleans Saints, and that could be to a fault after a certain point, but a very, very loyal organization, the New Orleans Saints. So if you can't make that move with somebody from the outside, because let's face it, Ken Dorsey coming in, he still has to run the New Orleans Saints offensive system. You're just looking for a fresh perspective. Pete Carmichael's selection of plays on 1st and 10 or 1st and goal might be one thing, but then Ken Dorsey's could be an entirely different thing, right? So, but if you want somebody that can bring that fresh perspective, that knows the system and can coach the system, Ronald Curry's still sitting there. So if the perspective is the only thing that needs to be changed, then maybe you look at the perspective of the change of play callers. But it doesn't seem that the New Orleans Saints are going to be willing to do that. And why is that the case? We look at the Las Vegas Raiders, we look at the Buffalo Bills, and we look at the New Orleans Saints. Why are they not making the moves in the hopes of improving themselves in the way that those two organizations have? The fact of the matter is that all 3 of those organizations are in wildly different situations. And maybe that's what's led to the New Orleans Saints standing pat with where they are. Is that the right decision? Is that the wrong decision? That's what we're going to break down next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Helps you be 100% certain that you're going to have access to the best and most qualified candidates available. That's why you got to go and check them out. LinkedIn Jobs. You're going to be able to take advantage of all of their fantastic hiring tools like screening questions, which make it easy to focus on the candidates you want to talk to that have the right skills and experience for you and your organization. That's why small businesses have voted LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality candidates versus the leading competitors out there. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So go and post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode also brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and of course, our official betting partners here at the Locked On Podcast Network. There's a massive favorite in the NFL going into this weekend's set of games. Right now, the Miami Dolphins favored by more than 10 points, about to go up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Usually, when you get a spread like that, you want to stay away from it. But right now, if you're a new customer, it's a great time to get in on exactly those types of heavy favorites. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 money line bet. So if you like the way that a team is favored, you can grab a heavy favorite and immediately get 30-1 odds guaranteed if you win that bet. That's $150 if your team wins. You can then take those bonus bets, put them over to spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to keep that NFL season rolling. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints have not made the drastic moves that the Las Vegas Raiders and the Buffalo Bills have, and mostly because all three of those teams are entirely different in terms of what situations they're in. But one thing that we can say for sure is that the New Orleans Saints should be looking to move around some responsibilities. There's varying degrees on how to go about this. Let me break down why the New Orleans Saints don't need to be inactive and instead can be active in a much less drastic way than the Buffalo Bills and the Las Vegas Raiders. Appreciate all of you everydayers for being here, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central, every single Friday, NFL kickoff, getting you all the biggest stories that you need and getting you ready for the weekend of NFL action. It's a stress-free week for the New Orleans Saints. So come in, get some early information on Friday on all of the action going on around the NFL before you sit back and enjoy some football on Friday. Let's take a look at the changes that the Las Vegas Raiders and the Buffalo Bills have made. The Las Vegas Raiders were in dire circumstances. They fired their head coach, their offensive coordinator. They even fired their general manager just a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago when the team was 3-5. The Buffalo Bills moving on from their offensive coordinator after losing their game Monday night and dropping to 5-5. But believe it or not, the Saints are not in the same situations as the Las Vegas Raiders and the Buffalo Bills. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't make changes. It just means that maybe they feel they don't have to make the same changes that the Buffalo Bills and the Las Vegas Raiders made. But that doesn't mean that they have to stand pat. So let's take a look at the situations as a whole. Let's start off with the Bills here since they're the most recent situation that happened, right? They're working to keep pace within a division with a team that is really, really good, the Miami Dolphins, right? So you look at the New Orleans Saints, they set themselves up constantly with, well, look, we still feel like we're competing within the division and all that other stuff. Like right now, the Saints are still first place in their division. Buffalo Bills, not first place in the division, but not third place in the division either. They're one game behind in that division right now, but they are still trying to keep pace with a very, very good Miami Dolphins team, right? That's pacing that division right now. They have one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. The New Orleans Saints do not. I'm talking best young quarterbacks in the NFL who just signed, a 6-year deal. That's not the situation that the Saints are in. They have high expectations, much higher than just win the division, right? That's a Super Bowl window team right now. It's hard to say that the New Orleans Saints are. And the Buffalo Bills may not be as loyal an organization as the New Orleans Saints have consistently proven to be. And as I said, sometimes being loyal can happen to a fault. So when I measure the two teams, they are in different situations. The thing that I stress the most, though, is that even though the Bills fired their offensive coordinator, and maybe you as the New Orleans Saints don't want to fire your offensive coordinator because you're not in the same situation, just because you're not in the same situation, you're not as drastic a situation as a team with the Super Bowl window that's failing to execute at that level right now, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be making changes. Like looking at a play caller change should still very much be an option for the New Orleans Saints. And it simply has not been acted upon or treated at all as an option, at least publicly, all throughout the season. Let's look at the Raiders, because the Raiders are 2-0 after moving on from their head coach, their offensive coordinator, and their general manager. First thing that I'll stipulate here is that they are 2-0, but they're 2-0 against the Giants and the Jets. So we're going to cool our Jets for just a little while in terms of looking at them as a 2-0 team. They haven't prospered just yet because they've beaten two bad teams. The New Orleans Saints, every team that they have beaten so far is a bad team, right? So like they're in the same situation there. So let's wait and see what happens when the Raiders this weekend go up against the Miami Dolphins, who are all but impervious at this point and have proven that. And if the Raiders can beat the Miami Dolphins, then we can start celebrating the Raiders as a team that makes a big shift at head coach, makes a big shift at offensive coordinator, makes a big shift at general manager, and got better. But right now, we can't say they got better because they've beaten two very bad teams in the Giants and the Jets. The thing that I'll highlight too is that like the Saints don't have to go anywhere near that far, right? They don't have to make a change at general manager. They don't have to make a change at head coach right now. They don't even have to make a change at offensive coordinator, as we just highlighted with the Buffalo Bills comparison. But you can make a change at play caller and bring in some new perspectives in terms of how it is that what's the selection of plays in this situation for one player, for one coach versus a different play caller, all of those things. The Raiders also completely lost the locker room, right? They had a whole meeting to where the team brought in the coaches and addressed Josh McDaniel directly to say, we don't feel like you've been maximizing us or whatever, right? That they didn't like the way that things were going. And then Josh McDaniels went out there and pouted for the next practice. And then the Las Vegas Raiders moved on from him. He also got mad at Antonio Pierce, who's now the interim head coach, for bringing up the Patriots team that Josh McDaniels was a part of as an example for why the team shouldn't give up with where they are right now. And the players, everybody loved that comparison. That meant a lot to them. Josh McDaniels got all salty about it. And then now he doesn't have a job. And then the other thing too is that they were third in the division at the time. They were 3-5. They were behind the Chargers. They were behind the Chiefs. The Broncos are surging. They were in a situation where it was like, okay, well, if we punted on the season, at least we're punting by kicking, right? At least we're doing something. We're not just kind of sitting back and then letting it all happen. And I think right there is the thing that a lot of Saints fans are looking at from outside of the organization, and a lot of analysts are looking at from outside of the organization and saying, why not go down swinging? It's one thing to punt on the season by actively kicking. It's another thing to punt on the season by going. It's one thing to hand the ball over to the defense by punting, right? Because you're actively moving the ball downfield. It's a different situation when you're just going and letting the clock run out. And that's kind of what it feels like right now if you're the New Orleans Saints and the way that the Saints have kind of gone on about this season. The Saints are not good on offense, and they haven't done a lot to address that. There haven't been any changes. They did mitigate a little bit of the confusion for the offense by limiting some of the play calling and things like that, but the system still has not improved. We're going to be breaking that down a little bit in terms of the why behind why the offense has struggled so much, but there's been no sort of visible shift, right? I mean, and you don't have to make any changes on the personnel. You have the personnel. The players are very good. The roster is really talented. The offensive line needs a considerable amount of help, but I mean, you're good. I mean, you should be a good team. And even though the offensive line hasn't progressed, they're also not terrible. The New Orleans Saints are one of the least pressured teams in the NFL. They're just consistent in terms of when they're being pressured, which is third down, which is a big issue. Situational football. Where does that go back to? That goes back to coaching. So when you're in a situation here to where you're just not seeing the improvement, but then you're sitting back and watching this all happen, it's very tough to look at it from the organization's perspective and see what they're doing when they're not making it apparent what changes they're making. And instead, it feels like complacency. And you don't want to be complacent as an organization, nor should you want to give off the impression of being complacent in an organization or as an NFL organization. So when you're a fan base and you're looking at other teams making changes, it's no wonder that you point back to your favorite team and go, well, why aren't the Saints doing something like that? And if they aren't doing something like that, what are they doing in terms of making those changes? And so far, the one thing that we know for sure that they've done is limiting the menu. And when that stops working, what's next is the big question. And that's for the New Orleans Saints to answer. Coming up next here, I can answer that question for you right now. We're going to take a look at the offense through the first 10 games. We're not just going to look at the fact that they have struggled. Let's look at why they've struggled. We're going to get to that as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. I absolutely love Prize Picks. It's me versus the house every time. I'm going to do a pick 4, and I'm going to do all quarterbacks. I'm going Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Bryce Young. Let me show you how this works. You're given a projection for each one of those quarterbacks in terms of passing yards, and then you simply choose more or less for each of them. Joe Burrow going up against the Baltimore Ravens defense. Yeah, I'll take the less on that. But Lamar Jackson going up against the Cincinnati Bengals defense that it might be without Trey Hendrickson. I'm going to take the more on that one. Bryce Young up against Dallas's defense. I'll take less on that one for sure. So it's that simple. You just pick more or less, tune those in, and then you can pick up to 2 to 6 players. You get up to 25 times your entry. And if it's your first time, let me make it even better for you. You can head over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL today and use the promo code LockedOnNFL and get a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, that is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code LockedOnNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at why the New Orleans Saints offense has been struggling. Okay. And I'm going to give you kind of the overarching thing that you need to know first Then let's kind of go through the more detailed stuff. The reason that the New Orleans Saints offense has been struggling from a consistent basis, I'm going to rule out stuff that is like game situation specific, right? So we're not going to look at like things like points off turnover and stuff like that, because that changes with every game. I'm just looking at what their trends and tendencies are and how some of those trends and tendencies are feeding in their inability to be consistent. And one of the major reasons why this offense has been so inconsistent, beyond like lack of identity and stuff like that, is that they just simply lack creativity, and they very, very, very simply lack dynamics. When I talk about dynamics, what I mean is being able to attack multiple areas of the field and keeping a defense guessing. So if you hand me the football and I run to the right every single time, right? Or if I'm dribbling up, like if we're talking about basketball here, if I'm dribbling up and I go with my right hand the entire time and I never dribble with my left hand, you know where to attack me. You know to force me to go to my left, because it's going to put the ball closer to you, all of those little things, right? If I'm a ball carrier and I only ever, as a running back, carry the ball in my right arm, you know where to attack the football. But if I'm able to cover up with two hands, if I'm able to switch hands and get to the opposite sideline, all those things, when I'm comfortable doing those things, it makes it harder to game plan, right? So like or to figure out where to attack. The issue for New Orleans is that they don't have a second hand, right? They don't have a left hand dribble. They don't ever move the ball to their left hand when they carry on the left sideline, right? They don't run to certain areas of the field, like all those other things. And in particular, it comes down to the passing game and its lack of dynamics. And a lot of this is scheme, system, and play call related. I'm going to say names like Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, stuff like that. This ain't really on them. This is them executing what's being called. And so when we talk about, and when you hear teams talk about, oh, well, there's a lack of execution, when the execution is there, the team still isn't performing consistently. So there's a larger conversation to be had. So let's look at the tendencies, the trends, and things like that. And I'll explain what I mean by there. And this will give more specific examples of what I mean by a lack of dynamics. Okay. One of the things that you do as an offense to be creative, to give different looks, stuff like that, is that you use different elements beyond just line up, snap the ball, drop back, pass, right? You incorporate play action so that there's a little bit there. And the Saints' run game maybe hasn't been great this season, but they're running the ball enough for play action to have an effect. With the exception of the Minnesota Vikings game here this past weekend, the Saints usually run the ball upward, high 20s, low 30s per game, only 15 times against the Minnesota Vikings. Lack of Taysom Hill involved in the run game, all those things. But like, they do the things enough to set up play action. The other thing that you do on offense oftentimes, instead of just line up, snap the ball, drop back, throw, is that you incorporate motion, get an idea of diagnosing the defense, get the defensive eyes, like looking in different places, stuff like that, challenge their eye discipline. The things that work against the New Orleans Saints defense, for instance. So let's start off with play action here. The New Orleans Saints are one of 30 teams that have quarterbacks that have taken at least 200 snaps, right? At least 200 dropbacks. Of those 30 teams, they are dead last in play action percentage, 11.6%. Teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New York Jets, and the Los Angeles Rams, all three of which have either had massive complaints about their offensive system or have not been consistently productive with their offensive system, in the case of the Rams, are all above the New Orleans Saints in that metric. Not great company. When it comes to pre-snap motion, the New Orleans Saints 31st, second to last in the NFL when it comes to pre-snap motion. What I want to draw your attention to there is not who are the teams that are around them, but who are the teams at the top of that list. Miami Dolphins, Houston Texans, San Francisco 49ers, as well as, of course, the Green Bay Packers. So when I look at that, one of the reasons why I highlight that is that, and the Philadelphia Eagles are up there as well, is that when you look at innovations going on in the NFL today, those offenses are some of the most innovative offenses. And some of them are innovating. You look at the trend that's sweeping the NFL right now is a style of motion that the Miami Dolphins are using when they line up a wide receiver on the inside of a group of receivers and then run with some teams call a cheat motion, others call the speed motion. And before they snap the ball, they get that wide receiver a running start as they wrap around the other receivers so that they're almost at max speed by the time that they get their release. That is what's sweeping the NFL right now. Motion. Okay. And that's where some of the largest innovations have happened in the NFL over the last decade have been relative to motion. The New Orleans Saints, second to last in even entering the chat on that conversation, let alone being a part of the conversation. New Orleans Saints are one of the 5 fastest quarterbacks when it comes to getting the ball out. That's usually a good thing, but let me explain why it isn't in this case. Derek Carr getting the ball out at one of the top fastest, under 2.5 seconds, right? Highest, one of the highest percentages there. But here's the thing. The Saints face pressure on the 30th ranked team when it comes to facing pressure. They've been consistently giving up pressure at the wrong times, third down, stuff like that. That's what's led to the pass blocking issues and challenges for the New Orleans Saints. But in terms of how often Derek Carr is under pressure, he's 30th in the NFL, according to our friends over at Fantasy Suite and their data hub. But he's also 4th in check down percentage. So here's the thing. You're getting the ball out quickly while not facing pressure, but you're not going to the intermediate short areas of the field. You're going to the checkdowns. You're going to the checkdowns without feeling pressure. You're getting the ball out quickly without feeling pressure. You're just getting the ball out to your checkdown, if that's the case, right? So like that's a big issue. But here's the other piece of it, right? You want to talk about dynamics. Being dynamic is not being two notes or one note. Being dynamic is having multiple notes, being multi-dimensional. The New Orleans Saints right now, 4th in the NFL when it comes to checkdowns, 1st in the NFL when it comes to deep throws. They're either throwing the ball 20 plus yards downfield or they're throwing at the line of scrimmage. What are you doing? Where's that going to get you? Out of 25 teams that have had at least 25 passing attempts from their quarterback in the intermediate area of the field. Out of 31 teams that have had at least 25. They seem to are 23rd out of 31 in targeting that area of the field. When I talk about the intermediate area of the field, I'm talking about between 10 to 19 yards downfield. The spot where Michael Thomas is fantastic. The spot where Chris Olave was phenomenal his rookie year. The spot where all offseason we talked about Rashid Shaheed getting better and better and better in that area of the field over the course of training camp. The New Orleans Saints, 21st in completion percentage between 10 and 19 yards downfield, 22nd in yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. That's it. That their offense has been either YOLO ball, 20 plus yards downfield, or check down. That's what the New Orleans Saints offense has been so far. 1st in the NFL in 20 plus yard plays, 4th in the NFL in terms of targeting between 9 and 0 yards of the line of scrimmage, and 11th in targeting behind the line of scrimmage. That is not dynamic. That is not dynamic. Dynamic means you need to take advantage of the intermediate area of the field as well. And you look at some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, Sam Howell, who's leading the NFL in passing yards over with the Washington Commanders. Yeah, he's up there. 40 more targets over the middle of the field than Derek Carr has so far this year. And I'm talking about between the numbers, right? A whole bunch of passing outside and going to the perimeter. I've seen one wheel route so far run by Alvin Kamara. And it was in the 4th quarter of the Jacksonville game. He wasn't targeted, but they were able to target and complete a pass to another receiver that was running just inside of him because he helped to clear out that area of the field by running that wheel route from out of the backfield. That target went to the intermediate area of the field. Alvin Kamara is not being consistently asked to run those option routes. The Saints just simply are not, again, for the 2nd year in a row, simply are not using Alvin Kamara to his greatest ability. Another reason why the Saints are struggling so far this year. 24th in red zone scoring, although they have gotten better here recently. 22nd in third down conversion rate. And they also, this one trips me out. The New Orleans Saints have the 2nd most targets to the end zone in the NFL, but yet 16 more teams have scored more passing touchdowns than they have. It's YOLO ball all over the field right now for the New Orleans Saints. It's not dynamic. It's not creative. It's not innovative. And therefore, it's not producing. So just like we talked about earlier, it's one thing to not be able to execute. It's another thing when you're executing and not getting production. And that's where the New Orleans Saints are different from the Buffalo Bills. The New Orleans Saints are not in a situation like what the Las Vegas Raiders were, but I still think that it's time that the New Orleans Saints take a very hard look at their ability to be able to make a real change in terms of responsibilities on the offensive side in order to go down swinging in the last 7 games of the season. You can't just keep moving forward with what you got, and they need to be more evident about what it is that they're doing to help their offense. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to do the same, something similar to this, but we're going to look at the defense, what's going on there, and what's been the difference between the first 5 games and the last 5 games. But I hope that this breakdown was helpful. I hope that it gives you a little bit of an idea and perspective that what you believe you're seeing from the New Orleans Saints that is frustrating is indeed there and is indeed frustrating. I appreciate you very much making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that you can always find us here every single Monday through Friday here, even over the bye week. I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.